New Galaxy Broadcasting proudly presents Integrative Hermetic Health with Hugo Rodier, MD. In this program, we explore a powerful new paradigm for health from the standpoint of integrative medicine. In his practice, Dr. Rodier integrates the ancient Hermetic art and the enduring role of food as medicine with modern nutrition, but also allowing for the wide range of important health practices, including truly valuable medical discoveries, chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathic, and herbal medicine. In this program, Hugo Rodier, an expert in intestinal health and nutrition, will help the audience discover an approach that focuses on actual cures, not the masking of the elegant simplicity of many health solutions for the sake of profit. Profit too long has been an overriding motive of the pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes, sadly, by many in the medical establishment today. Good morning. My name is Johnny Bluestar, and I'm happy to be working with Hugo Rodier, an integrative medical physician who is the founder and host of the Integrative Hermetic Health Show. And Dr. Rodier is with me this morning, and we're going to explore with us various concerns about integrative health education. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Johnny.
I gather that, for one thing, before we go into the specific articles, you're a little bit concerned about depression.
Well, good articles are saying that it will be the number one disease after 2020. We're almost there. And it might be already the number one disease in our country. So this has to be a major public health concern for everyone. Yet it's barely mentioned. As you know, we still talk about cancer and heart disease. And we should. It's not like one disease is kind of needs to get all the attention like the others.
We want to be fair, right, in distributing the disease concerns.
Exactly. So we've been talking about depression for a long time, that is in the medical system. I think we stopped talking about it because, number one, we don't seem to be making any progress. Two, people don't know what to do. The system doesn't know what to do other than give you a bunch of pills. Three, we're not addressing the real malaise in the system, in our society, I should say. And so out of frustration, we sweep the problem under the carpet, if you will. And so we need to bring awareness to this problem. We ourselves have talked about it. It just doesn't hurt to talk again, particularly because of a landmark article that came out last month, if I recall, in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And that's the main thing we want to share today about depression, a little bit of hope.
Okay, so I'm going to read a short paragraph from this article called Diet and Depression from Confirmation to Implementation from the JAMA Journal. An integrative care package incorporating first-line psychological and pharmaceutical, along with evidence-based lifestyle intervention addressing smoking cessation, physical activity, and diet quality may have a more robust effect on this burdensome disorder. These approaches may also be more cost-effective than other approaches. What do you think?
Well, that's a landmark article, and that's why I wanted to bring up the topic again, because for the first time in a major publication, we see an article acknowledging that non-pharmaceutical ways to tackle the problem are very good and more economically effective. And we always need to throw in the economic factor. As we are an integrative show, we want to be balanced.
Right.
True, a lot of people will say, no, we've talked about counseling and Tai Chi yoga, things like that before. As far as treating depression, many articles have shown that counseling, even exercise, can be just as good as Prozac. All right, yes, we've had those articles, but I don't recall seeing an article squarely saying that diet has a lot to do with depression. Of course, we've seen a whole lot of articles about diet and depression, but not in a major journal like the JAMA.
I can say for sure that in my experience, as a person always struggling about food, is that it has an amazing effect on my mood. I'm not saying necessarily causing depression, but it does cause ups and downs of all kinds. I mean, it's not like, it is like taking a drug a lot of times.
Yes, we know exactly the biochemistry of that. We know that sugar, refined sugars, curtail the absorption of B vitamins, omega oils, and minerals, which are essential in synthesizing neurotransmitters from the amino acids we eat. So that right there has a huge impact on the neurochemistry of our brain. Further, we also know that by messing with our microbiome bacteria in the gut, by eating poorly, we mess with the brain-gut connection that we have brought up many a times on this show. And we also know the addictive nature of sugar. And so there are many factors why this is happening, diet. And also, it's worth pointing out that depression, I haven't been depressed for quite a while. I used to be more prone to depression as a young man because when we're young, we just haven't learned much about life, and we let our thoughts get away from us. We let circumstances gnaw at us a little bit more. As we get older, we learn to cope with these situations. But as a young man, I remember being so excited to find out how I got depressed. And it seems silly and naive, perhaps childish, but it's worth pointing out, as this major discovery I made, that depression starts with one single step. And then if you don't control it, then there's the second step, the third, fourth, fifth. Pretty soon you're so depressed you don't know how to come back up. And that one single step, that one thought that might trigger everything, a negative thought, be it economics or relationships or whatever, if we don't nip it in the bud, it gets a life of its own. Pretty soon it begins to consume you. And so that's why I loved finding out about William James. Does that name ring a bell?
Variety of religious experience?
Well, he wrote a lot of stuff, but about 100 years ago, maybe less, William James was the best psychologist in the Western world, in my opinion, American.
Yeah.
And he wrote a lot, but one of the things that got me right between the eyes was, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said that the greatest discovery of the century is to find out that man can control his thoughts. And it was quite a revelation because I grew up without parents. And unfortunately, as a child, I picked up a book on Freud, Sigmund Freud, which really tied me up in knots because Freud was about more pathology, dissecting pathology. And of course, I had every disease he talked about in my mind. And so William James was so liberating for me to find out that if you can just control that first thought and not so much put it out of your mind, but pay attention to it, see where it's coming from, and put it aside and move on. Find a song or a friend or something to concentrate on better thoughts. And so all that is worth noting because we've known for a while that counseling and behavioral therapy are very good for depression. But again, this article that you quoted puts it all together very well, and it adds diet. The only problem with the article is it continues to put pharmaceutical.
Well, he felt he had to, right? So he could stay in the journal.
Exactly. You're probably right about that. And I'm not saying that we don't need pharmaceuticals. I think they're overprescribed. I think people could do without in many cases. But most certainly, they are needed in some cases. And so let's not go too far the other way either.
Well, I was thinking about what you said about thought. And this is an interesting, although somewhat oblique comment. In the in the New Testament, there's a word called metanoia, which is interpreted to mean repentance. So in other words, you're supposed to, you do something wrong, you repent. But actually the word, it comes from two Greek words, syllables, meta meaning change and noia meaning mind. So it actually is saying change your mind. Well, what does that mean? I think that what it means is change from your lower personality, which is sort of called the soul in the New Testament, something like that. It's a little more complicated, but to your spirit, to that part of you that's connected to your higher self, to God. So it's a completely different connotation between changing the way you're looking at things and the way you're thinking about things. And then coming from the word repent, which means penitare, it comes from in Latin meaning to punish, like punishing yourself, which is in a certain sense, you're repenting by you're trying to get this off your chest. You feel terrible about it and all that. Whereas really I think what's being asked of you is to change the way you're thinking. So that's my thought.
Yes, which agrees with what we were talking about, William James and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but I contemplated this issue before, exactly what you said, and there's a bit of a danger here in that we don't want to come across as saying to a poor depressed patient, well, you just need to repent and forsake your sins, and couch it all in a very moralistic, judgmental way. So that's my only concern about.
Well, no, the idea of that concept of repentance is different. It's the opposite. It's changed the way you think. For instance, yes. what's happening in a person in all kinds of situations, including, I believe, depression, is they have a narrative that's going in their mind. They may not even be aware of what that narrative is, but it's basically describing things in a way that leads to that kind of escalation of negative emotions about it. And
I agree. I'm just telling you what the word repentance can mean in a fundamentalist.
Exactly. Sense. No, that's what. Yeah, I agree.
That's a caution I'm throwing in there.
Yeah.
So it's a word that, yes, we talked about the intended meaning, but that word repentance carries a lot of emotion.
Oh, yeah. In other words, I wouldn't think a psychologist should use it in discussing anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to imply that. I was just saying that the original meaning was something quite different. And and so I do feel that I do a lot of work with changing narratives. And it's been very helpful to me. So if I'm getting really upset about a person, I start to look at that person sort of more like a child of God, or in a positive, very positive light, and I start hoping and wishing and thinking of that person in exactly the opposite way, and it actually does work. It has really changed me from being an angry person to a more kinder person, especially inside. But I think so. Anyway, there's no simple answer to this question of depression, but we might as well go on to something else like mushrooms.
Yeah, as long as we...
That's our next article, incidentally. I didn't mean anything else by it.
Well, people will see what you meant here in a minute, but let's address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
Why is it that the index of depression is going up so much? Why is there so much anger? And I see here the text that you wanted to talk about, and I totally agree. So you've written about low wages, economic pressures, health insurance costs, credit card debt, student loans, inflation, and you bring up all those issues because you have a political approach to your website and all that, which is very welcome and necessary. But in my opinion, we can boil all this stuff down, economic, social, political issues, problems in our country, to a single sentence. We are a decaying empire with all the consequences, social, political, economic consequences on our lives. And that's why we're depressed.
I totally agree with that. And I think that also affects our diet, doesn't it? I mean, when you have all those problems, where do you go? If you can't go anywhere else, maybe not to the arms of a beautiful woman and maybe not to the movies, you're going to go to food.
Right, exactly. So food is the cheapest way to muffle, to self-treat, if you will.
Yeah.
Take, for instance, Utah. Why is Utah number one in processed sugar consumption? Because a whole lot of members of church here will not go to tobacco and alcohol, which are the preferred soothing toys of other states, and then throw in marijuana and a whole lot of other drugs.
We have to throw in diet soda if we're going to talk about the Mormon community.
I lump that with processed sugars. But the point being is that people need to numb themselves. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but that's an escape. And so a lot of people escape to food and sugar and soda and all those things. And look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do drugs. I think we should be more libertarian about it. If that's what people want to do, that's fine. Let's just help them with the problem, because it does become a problem if we abuse these things.
Incidentally, you mentioned a book by Robert Sapolsky called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Here's a rather interesting segment from his inaugural Fenton Rhodes lecture on proactive wellness. In the beginning of the lecture, he asked the audience a few questions. Now he asks one more.
If your blood pressure is 180 over 120 every time you're stuck in traffic or something, you're not saving your life. You are suffering from stress-induced hypertension. And you do that chronically enough, and you're going to damage your cardiovascular system. Okay, 30 seconds already, you are more at risk for cardiovascular disease than if you smoke, than if you are overweight, than if you have elevated cholesterol levels, a huge risk factor. Where you're in the supermarket and you've picked the slow line and you want to kill the son of a bitch kid behind the cash register. Come on. How do you know I have a 1 o'clock meeting trying to screw me up? No, don't ask the old lady how she is today. Come on. I'm going to die someday. If this is what you're doing, instead of checking out the Elvis sightings in the National Enquirer, your blood pressure is going to go up. And if this is what you're doing every time somebody could have held the elevator door open for you but didn't, if you're doing this 40 times a day, you're going to pound away at your blood vessels set up for cardiovascular disease.
This is Johnny Bluestar, CEO of New Galaxy Enterprises, a media content development company. Want to write a book but don't want the challenges of developing time-consuming social media platform, costly private book promotions, complex email campaigns, and advertising commitments? If you write a book about your business, you don't need a mass audience. Focus on prospective clients with the best business card there is, your own book. To learn more about New Galaxy, see samples of our work, or talk to us about your project, please go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com and fill out the contact form.
It is the 15th century. El Tesoro de Cielo, a Spanish treasure ship, sends a scouting expedition to a strange island. Golden statues surrounding them prove the enormity of their find. Suddenly, hordes of ghoulish creatures with scaly green flesh and skeletal wings descend upon them from the sky.
What do you think of this, Rufio?
These creatures are fragile, Captain. We can take them with our swords.
They seem supernatural. Who knows what powers they possess?
Fallen angels, weakened by their treason.
My God, are you saying they're Nephilim, the devil's host?
I'm saying, whatever they are, we can take them. Do any of you cowards dare join me?
Up against sharp knife-like nails and hideous fangs, the men's swords rip into slimy green flesh. Though black blood pours copiously from their half-naked bodies, the creatures miraculously persist. Can the crew survive this bloody, cursed battle?
Find out more by Googling The Thrice Born, a new sci-fi supernatural novel by Carlos Lopez Avery and Johnny Bluestar. Google with the words Carlos Johnny Kendall, The Thrice Born. That's Carlos Johnny Kendall, The Thrice Born.
Well, welcome back to the Integrative Hermetic Health Show with Dr. Rodier. Doctor, we were talking about how sometimes people escape to drugs, and we're not trying to certainly endorse anything particularly, but there's an interesting article that we see here in Medscape. It's called Mushrooms May Cut Cognitive Impairment Risk. And if you don't mind, I'll read a little bit of it, okay?
All right.
Older adults who consume more than 2 standard portions of mushrooms per week may have as much as 50% reduced odds of developing mild cognitive impairment. Investigative data from over 650 participants aged plus or minus 60 years from the Diet and Healthy Aging study in Singapore found that compared with participants who consume mushrooms less than once per week, those who consume more than 2 portions per week had a reduced odds of MCI. The association was independent of factors such as age, gender, lifestyle factors, and comorbidities. We found that mushroom consumption is associated with the reduced odds of having MCI among Chinese older adults in Singapore says this lead author, Lei Fang, assistant professor at the School of Medicine in Singapore. Our cross-sectional data support a potential role for mushrooms in their bioactive compounds, especially ergothioneine, which is a compound with antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties in delaying neurodegeneration. Well, that's nice, isn't it? Does this mean that, can I take away from this that I'll get smarter if I eat pizza with mushrooms daily instead of plain pepperoni pizza?
No, I'm sorry, you cannot.
Really? What a disappointment. No.
Well, it's because, look, the article tells you the mechanism of action is the same as we've talked about before, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. So our brains, be it depression, be it any other brain problem, even the heart, any organ, is about toil, T-O-I-L, toxicity, oxidation, inflammation, and less than optimal mitochondrial function. And so that's how disease happens. And we can forestall disease, even treat disease, by focusing on reversing toxicity, oxidation, inflammation, and improving mitochondrial function. And so that's what mushrooms are doing. So they're reducing inflammation, oxidation. They also, by doing that on the liver and our gut bacteria, they reduce toxicity by improving detoxification pathways. And then they also enrich how the mitochondria functions, because its cell membrane, the mitochondria, can also toil. Further, I just had an argument with a friend who still believes that diet cannot influence our genes. So he's stuck in very old paradigms, meaning that, yes, we have many articles saying that our DNA, our genes, can be and are modulated by the food we eat, because then we reduce inflammation, oxidation of the DNA itself. And so, yeah, eating pepperoni pizza with mushrooms is much like drinking coffee and taking a Zantac so it doesn't irritate you. I suppose you might come out even, but hard to say. Depends on how much pepperoni and cheese and how refined the crust is, I suppose. Did you know they have mushroom crust? You can buy mushroom crust.
No, I didn't.
Now. Yeah, in fact, Costco carries it. Now, it might not be very organic. It might not be the best, but, that's a step in the right direction. So,
well, what if they were psilocybin mushrooms? Maybe that would give more of a boost to their unique abilities. Because I understand that psilocybin mushrooms that contain psilocybin can help with depression. Isn't that true? Absolutely.
Yes. The problem with psilocybin is that it can become addicting. And it's just like everything else when we talk about drugs, even food. And so we also have to work on, do we have an addicting personality or not? Is our upbringing so void of affection that we are easily prey to addictions? Because I believe that's a root of addictions. I had another argument with a friend who breezily stated that everyone has an addiction. He said that as he was with a bong in his hands, and so no, not everyone has an addiction. From his viewpoint, yeah, everyone he might be associating with might have an addiction. That's true. But the point being is that psilocybin and mushroom themselves, not the healthy mushrooms that we find in our diet, but mushrooms like psilocybin can become a problem.
Well, I remember when Tim Leary and Richard Alpert were still teaching at Harvard, Leary went to Mexico and he discovered psilocybin mushrooms. And he started to do experiments with them until he found out about LSD, which was just breaking a new biochemical substance that was just discovered, and then he turned to that. But I saw very close up the ramifications of that whole movement because many of my friends were involved. I saw many very, very bad things happen, as well as obviously there was a lot of transformation involved.
Yes.
Like, for instance, Leary did an experiment with jails, bringing psilocybin to prison. I mean, not psilocybin, bringing LSD to prison, and there was a tremendous lack of recidivism. So there are things that I heard many really good things, and I heard a lot of really bad things. And so
it depends. It depends on the person, like I was saying.
Sort of like that. That's what the shamans were doing. They were controlling things.
Exactly.
And in our country, like peyote is allowed in certain Indian cultures, and I've known people who participated in those things, and they seem to be okay.
Exactly.
But yeah, you have to control the addiction, and also there can be personalities that don't do very well with these drugs.
Exactly. So it's worth repeating that the problem really is not the substance, but the recipient. And so if a person has had a bad childhood, they're more likely to become addicted to this and that, trying to fill that void that a good upbringing would have filled normally. It's also worth repeating what we talked about. How is it that mushrooms or any food having antioxidant, anti-inflammatory properties will help just about every other organ, the immune system, and even help cancer? And so it's worth repeating is because by working on toil, TOIL, we then improve the function of every cell in the body, including those cells or organisms that live in the gut, which are most of our immune system, improve the cells of the liver, which help you detoxify a whole lot of chemicals. Remember that cancer is 85% environmental. And so, it can be confusing to someone tuning in for the first time to our integrative show. So it's worth repeating that when we start to strike at the roots of disease, toil, emotional issues, environmental issues, everything starts to get better, including cancer.
Well, speaking of cancer, we're going to go to a little bit of a digression here, but actually it's a meaningful digression because the article that we're talking about, which was in USA Today, is called Drinking Over 2 Cups of Very Hot Tea Daily Increases Esophageal, how do you pronounce that?
Esophageal
cancer risks. Thank you. This is by Yamzi Bragg, reports research suggesting that drinking very hot tea may be linked to an increased risk of esophagus cancer.
All right.
Thank you. Researchers tracked the habits of more than 50,000 tea drinkers in Golestan, a province in northeastern Iran. Over the course of a decade, 317 new cases of esophagus cancer were developed. Investigators found that those who drank more than 700 milligrams, almost 24 ounces of tea a day, temperature of 60 degrees Celsius, that's 140 degrees Fahrenheit, had a 90% higher risk for esophagus cancer. So it says that the study was the first to pinpoint a specific temperature, according to the authors. They were published in the International Journal of Cancer. So what do you think of that?
Well, I had a patient call me once I put this article out there. As you know, these articles are in my newsletters. I wrote, it's not the temperature, not the tea. But she still called me, all concerned. Well, I guess she didn't read the bottom line. It's the temperature, not the tea.
Well, so, is that true of coffee too? I mean,
any hot drink.
So why why does heat cause cancer?
Because it burns you. And so think of your skin gets burned. Would it not be more susceptible to an infection right there? Right. In fact, that's why we put Silvadene cream on burns to prevent an infection. Silver, sort of an antibiotic. And so if the lining of an organ like the esophagus, or a structure, I should say, like the esophagus is kind of burned, it's more susceptible to infections. And all that leads to hyper repair or changes that can cause mutations in the repair phase that can lead to cancer. So do you follow?
Yeah, I do. So yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to make it clear to my readers and listeners that please keep drinking tea. The articles on green tea and many other teas are a dime a dozen, how they help with a whole lot of conditions, even heart disease.
Right, that's good news. That we've saved tea. In Reuters for right now, there's an article that says prescribing healthy food could save the lives of millions of Medicare and Medicaid patients. Healthy food prescriptions written for Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries might lower the cost might lower the risk of costly chronic illnesses such as diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and at the same time lower the cost of care, according to a study published in PLOS Medicine. The article says that researchers use computer models to determine that, quote, healthy food prescriptions could prevent as many as 3.28 million cardiovascular events such as heart attacks and strokes, and save as much as $100.2 billion in healthcare costs. They found that if fruits and vegetables were prescribed, about 1.3 million cardiovascular events would be prevented and 39.7 billion would be saved. That sounds like almost a war in Afghanistan. The cost of the war, you know what I mean? It's a tremendous amount of money, right?
Exactly. I love this article. It's just common sense. But what really gets me is the second line that by prescribing healthy food might lower the risk of costly chronic illnesses.
Okay.
Might? Really? Why pussyfoot around? Well, we know why. I'm just being dramatic. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean, unfortunately. So, you see, we're talking about problems with the healthcare system in general, and yet we are about to embark on a whole new version of possibly Medicare, Medicaid with Medicare for All and its various variants. But we've discussed a lot about the problems with that just basically financial change in our healthcare system rather than dealing with it directly. My company, New Galaxy Enterprises, is a California corporation specializing in the creation of media and promotional content. We are focused on original, innovative projects that are good for humanity. These projects could be nonfiction books or novels, fictional screenplays or documentary content, websites and website content, commercial advertising content for print, audio, or video products on the internet, television, or radio, musical scores for advertising, television or film, video, audio editing, etc. We want to promote products and projects that support the environment, encourage a healthy experience in living, developing, nurturing, and useful technology, and offering platforms for positive, socially constructive entertainment or informative, transformative media. Our experience in creating a variety of products like this is rather vast, and we offer client-based and collaborative products, as well as the opportunity of active investors to join us in the creation and promotion of proprietary products, some of which are in latter stages of development. For more information, go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com. That's www.newgalaxyenterprises.com. If you're interested in talking to us, just fill out the contact sheet and we will get back with you. Dr. Hugo Rodier has published 4 books on health issues covering practically all chronic health problems. You may find them by accessing his website at hugorodier.com. That's HUGORODIER.com. Gut health is the most academic, while switching off chronic disease is the most patient-oriented, with simple recipes to implement his nutritional protocols. Here's a beautiful original peace song by MDF, which is dedicated to those who risk their lives to help others.
In the ruins of a burned down home, she finds a worn out tambourine, sings a song that ends the road, somewhere in a secret dream. A hand that feeds the heart that beats, and a broken down war machine. Words of peace from a book she reads, somewhere in a secret dream. A soldier turns, he's tired and torn. Only God knows where he's been. Flags of freedom and the friends he lost, somewhere in The children laugh and the children play, free to walk in the fields of green. The buried still a memory, somewhere in a secret dream. A hand that feeds the heart that needs, and a broken down war machine. Words of peace from a book we read, somewhere in a secret dream, somewhere in a secret dream, somewhere in a secret dream.
So we're back on the Integrative Hermetic Health Hour with Dr. Hugo Rodier.
Well, in the last segment, we talked about how much improvement in all fields, including economic improvement, if we were to prescribe healthy food to people. So here's a glaring example out of Barcelona, Medscape, saying that just getting people to eat better, to relax more, to avoid toxic environments, get rid of sugar, spicy foods, coffee, alcohol, would improve the PSA. And as people know, the PSA is a prostatic specific antigen. So it wouldn't be so high. Then you would be spared a prostate biopsy, which is a pain in the butt, I must say. And so, look, when prostate cancer afflicts 1/2 of men, this is worth putting out there, that if you just eat better and take care of yourself, you probably will lower your risk of cancer and sparing biopsy of the prostate 2/3 of the time. How about that?
That's pretty good. Wonderful. Well, doctor, I see that according to an article that you sent out, this is from Reuters, that the FDA has added sugar labeling rules that might have significant health benefits and even economic benefits as well. I'm just going to read this short paragraph.
Sure, go ahead.
That Reuters reports that the Food and Drug Administration's new mandatory rules requiring labels on all packaged foods and drinks to indicate the presence of so-called added sugars could have substantial health and cost-saving benefits in the United States over the next 2 decades. A new study published in the American Medical Journal Circulation suggests. Specifically, researchers determined that the labeling policy, which is set to go into effect between 2020 and 2021, might prevent nearly 1 million cases of heart disease and diabetes. What do you think?
Okay, before I tell you, I'm curious to think how the article strikes you. What do you think?
Well, I don't really know about the label thing. I mean, how effective have labels been with cigarettes or other types of products that are, whether it's cleaners or, some kind of, just any kind of product that has toxic possibilities. Have they been effective?
Not at all. The human mind has an amazing capacity to deceive itself. So these are people that are well-intended, I get that. People who see a need for change, a need for improvement, but this is just wishful thinking. It's Pollyannish, in my opinion.
Right.
The main failure to communicate here, quoting Cool Hand Luke, is that people, the system, doctors, patients, business, corporations, do not get that sugar is an addiction, a true addiction. We've talked about this before.
Many times.
Yeah, many times. Has labeling of tobacco, alcohol, opioids helped? Well, the answer is a rotund no. Okay, so this is wishful thinking, much like posting calories in the menu at restaurants or other poorly thought out measures like that.
Well, let me just ask you a question here. In terms of smoking, there's obviously been a difference. I don't hardly know anybody who smokes anymore. But the labeling wasn't the effect. It was more the publicity, other kinds of publicity, or what?
Not even that. No, the only thing, well, according to what I've read, I may be wrong here, but the only thing that truly had an impact was taxing tobacco. That was the only thing that led to a drop in tobacco. In fact, European countries are doing the same thing. They have not, with their wishful thinking and campaigns to decrease tobacco, have not decreased it one bit. You go to Europe, everybody's smoking. And so they're thinking to tax tobacco a whole lot more heavily. And that's the only thing that worked in the United States. Look at the opioid epidemic we've got right now. It's wishful thinking to keep educating people that opioids are bad. It's not going to work. The only thing that's going to work is looking at these things as true addictions, as true drugs, and helping people either economically through rehabilitation programs decriminalize these problems, these drugs, and tax them more and make them government regulated instead of the mafia. But back to sugar. The basic problem is that the system, doctors and patients, just don't view it as a true addiction. All the school lunches that we've had, none of them has worked because as we tell kids to eat more veggies, the vending machine down the hall selling all kinds of candy bars and soda pop are beckoning them.
Oh.
So it hasn't worked either, school lunch programs to curb sugar addiction. So I'm glad that you brought this article up because I just think it's a serious problem, and we're not going to solve it with wishful thinking and labeling, in my opinion. I think the Twinkie tax is going to be the main thing here. A Twinkie tax is just a cute way of saying we need to tax soda pop and refined sugars, candy bars, and processed foods more. And here's another double whammy. It turns out that all these processed foods are a lot cheaper than veggies. And so you do the math and you see why poor people are caught in a bind, in a vicious cycle. So poor people not able to afford veggies, they have to buy all the box food that they find very cheap on sale at every grocery store. And so that perpetuates a cycle of addiction. Poverty does.
In our store, Fresh Market, they do have a fairly large organic selection of vegetables, but it's certainly not overwhelming, but it's certainly there. But if you go down the aisles, there is some organic stuff and gluten-free stuff, but not much. It's mostly stuff that has additives, and even some of the gluten-free doesn't mean it doesn't have additives.
Right. So it becomes an economic problem. So if we're going to do the Twinkie tax, we're going to have to help poor people. And of course, I'm talking socialism here, so or what's viewed as socialism. So you can see the bind we're in, because any program that will truly work has to be economic, and it has to involve helping those people below the poverty line. And of course, we're very good at corporate welfare, supporting corporations.
Yes, right. Lots of farmers and big agriculture and oil companies and so forth, yeah.
So you see the problem. So labeling, to me, it's just like it's barking up the wrong tree. It's wishful thinking without considering the big problems we have in our society politically, economically, and morally as far as addictions and, and so this is why people look for a quick answer, a feel-good answer. Oh, we're doing something. We're putting label on foods, Great. So they pat each other on the back, go home to their gated communities. They've done something, you see.
Did you see the movie The Insider with Russell Crowe?
Oh, I sure did.
And that was a very, very powerful movie, but it was very strange how 60 Minutes suppressed the actual story for a long time.
Yeah, that was Dan Rather's biggest blunder, in my opinion. He knew he caved under the pressures of the corporate people running his network. I think
that wasn't Dan Rather's, though.
It wasn't Dan Rather's?
No, I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Wallace.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was Wallace. His son's name, I think, is Chris Wallace. But
okay. Well, the reporters caved in, if I remember, right?
Well, no, the network caved in because there was a proposed merger, and they didn't want to freak anyone out.
Right. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Do you remember the movie called The Insider with Russell Crowe?
Oh, yes, great. True story. Tell us about it.
Well, basically, Russell Crowe played the part of a scientist, this is a true story, who discovered that his company was completely lying about the effect of cigarettes on people's health. In other words, they knew that's right, that they were addiction, that nicotine was addicting them, but they also knew that it caused cancer. And they had a lot of false publicity about both things, and he just couldn't take it anymore, and he risked his life, his marriage, his career, everything to get that to the public through 60 Minutes and Mike Wallace. And the 60 Minutes did do the program, and then they censored it. And the reason they censored it was because a merger was afoot, and this was a tremendously painful thing for the scientists, and also for Al Pacino played the representative of 60 Minutes, very close to Mike Wallace, and he also was extremely guilt-ridden about what happened. And in the end, there was some kind of satisfaction. But basically, you were talking about cancer and how these people had repressed cancer and nicotine addiction for years. So that is a sort of testimony to some of the obstacles you have when you try and even promote it in a normal, newsworthy way.
Absolutely. In fact, that insider story is totally relevant to what we're talking about on two levels. One, the political economic pressures that we're facing. Two, how they were hiding evidence that tobacco was addicting and carcinogenic, and specifically nicotine, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same with sugar right now, is what I'm saying. So sugar is addicting. It has been shown to promote more cancer. In fact, that won the Nobel Prize in 1931. Dr. Warbucks? No, what was his name?
Not sure.
Anyway, and so those are two glaring parallels to the sugar story that we're facing. And so there's a big cover-up, if you will, and people are addicted. So how do we solve this conundrum? I think it's going to be an economic and political battle to get on top of this one.
Well, another thing that it's not the same thing, but what strikes me is the way that Exxon covered up the research they'd done into global warming, which they knew about, and they actually promoted certain articles and statements about global warming that weren't true, where they knew the science wasn't true. Now, it wasn't completely consistent because sometimes they did take a more global warming position, but the point is that they thought that there was, and they were promoting the opposite, just like these tobacco companies.
Yeah, Deep Throat was so right. If you want to know the truth, follow the money. That's what it boils down to.
There has been a lot of concern about cancer over the years, but it is sort of shameful that you have to do something like this economically. Anyway, but it's not exactly the same as corporate welfare. For more information about Dr. Rodier's practice, books, blogs, and newsletters, contact Hugo Rodier, MD, at www.hugorodier.com. That's HUGORODIER.com. There are many ways to deal with stress. One particularly wonderful way is to take advantage of the amazing choices of music for healing, meditation, and prayer. Here's some beautiful hymn and praise music performed by Life Breakthrough.